Okay, so let's get this out of the way first. Every single season on this list, for every single MVP going back to 2010, is great. They're all amazing. So even if I sound disrespectful to one year in particular, remember this is all relative to each other's seasons, and also this is not factoring in the postseason, just the regular season where the MVP is determined. So you got that? All right. So with that being said, let's start this one out with a pretty uncontroversial one, or at least one that I would think is uncontroversial. And in last place, give me 2017 Tom Brady. Now, this is still Tom Brady we're talking about. And in 2017, Thomas was still in his prime, fresh off of a Super Bowl win, so the narrative for him winning his third MVP was there. And by year's end, Thomas Edward Patrick Brady Jr.'s stats of 286 yards per game, 2 touchdowns flat, and half a pick at the age of 40 is still pretty damn impressive, but honestly, that's kinda where the compliments end, because when you take a step back and look at Brady's career as a whole, 2017 wasn't even a top 5 regular season for Tom, and at the time, the MVP race was between Carson Wentz, who honestly, if he stayed healthy, probably would have won the MVP, but you know, even his stats weren't that incredible, but the other guy in the race was Alex Smith, where now that sounds just insane to say, but trust me, it was a thing, and Tom Brady ended up winning the MVP anyways. But what I'm trying to say is that this season wasn't really anything super special in terms of overall counting stats, but if we were factoring in the playoffs, we'd be talking about a whole nother player, because to this day, there might not be a better effort in a Super Bowl loss than Tom Brady versus the Eagles that year. Gotta love Tom. At number 13, 2023 Lamar Jackson. Man, so this is an MVP that is kind of already getting very disrespected by apparently people like me, but also I just have a bad feeling this MVP is going to age worse and worse, mainly because of this pre-Super Bowl Peyton Manning trap he's fallen into, where people aren't giving him the credit he deserves because of his lack of playoff success, as well as without context on the Ravens scheme, his stats they're just not really going to hold up over time. I mean, Lamar averaged 230 passing yards per game, 50 rushing yards, and 1.5 touchdowns, and he wasn't even close to cracking the top 5 in passing yards or even passing touchdowns in 2023, but he still did deserve to win this MVP, and honestly, it wasn't even that close, and ended up saving his best performance for when it mattered most, having a 5-touchdown, 320-yard game with an actual perfect passer rating to lock up a win and the MVP versus the Dolphins, but still. Lamar was the Ravens' offense this year. Without him, this team would have been the New York Jets, but that doesn't take away from the fact that Lamar still had his fair share of dud games, and not only has almost every other MVP done better than Lamar did this season, but Lamar himself has done better too, which we'll get to in a few spots. But his predecessor is next up on the list, and 2015 Cam Newton is an extremely polarizing player. No avoiding that. And out of every MVP on this list, Cam Newton is probably the least statistically impressive on paper. He had the second least total passing yards, 4th most interceptions, and the worst completion percentage out of all the MVP quarterback winners on this list. But to end there would just be a crime, because Cam Newton's impact on the 2015 Panthers team that went on to win 15 games was so far beyond the stat sheet. The swagger he brought into each game was ridiculous, and I just made a video on the Panthers, so you can check that out after if you want a more in-depth analysis of Cam Newton in 2015, but to sum it up here, he was simply the engine of the best team in football, and he did it all with his wide receiver 1 being Jericho Cotchery, and 240 yards per game, 2 touchdowns, and 40 yards on the ground per game, as well as a touchdown there, is nothing to ignore. But still, that leads us to talk about a team that got exposed worse than maybe any MVP's team ever, with the 2021 Green Bay Packers, and more specifically 2021 Aaron Rodgers, and honestly, there's not much to say. This was a prototypical prime Aaron Rodgers year. Rodgers won his 2nd straight MVP, and his last, and no chance in hell he ever wins another one from here, and went for 260 yards per game and a little over 2 touchdowns, while leading the league in passer rating as he does. But like I said, this was just how Aaron Rodgers was in his prime, and this season was just honestly above average for him. He alone has had way better seasons than this, like, trust me, way better seasons that we'll get to, but I don't know, Rodgers was already past his physical prime this year and didn't seem as dominant as in seasons prior, but I don't know, maybe it's the fact that he shat himself in the playoffs that sticks in my mind more than it should, or that he also shat himself in week 1 in front of the whole world, but still. this was an amazing year, obviously, just nothing otherworldly against this tough of competition. As we move into the top 10, 2014 Aaron Rodgers, I think, slightly edges out himself 7 years in the future, but still, it's the same old with him. For most quarterbacks, this year would have been their best season ever, but for Rodgers, it was just another 16 games, and this year he wasn't first in really any category like total touchdowns or passing yards, but he was up there in literally every category. At the time, PFF graded his season with a 93.3, his best grade for a season ever at the time, as he averaged 270 yards, 2.5 touchdowns per game on a 112.2 passer rating, while leading the top scoring offense in the NFC to a 12-win record. Like, this is a quarterback fans would remove a testicle to have on their team, so don't get it twisted. I don't want it to sound like I'm just trying to skip over the season by Rodgers. It's just, he's that good of a player that he's managed to overshadow himself significantly. At number 9, I have 2010 Tom Brady, 14 years ago. Now, this was one of Brady's best seasons. With the duo of Gronk and Hernandez, Wes Welker, and Deion Branch's return, the Patriots' offense was ruthlessly efficient, as Brady's best stretch of games came when he hanged back-to-back 350-yard, 4-touchdown games in blowout wins versus the Lions and Jets, and by year's end, he finished with these averages of 243 yards per game and 2.5 touchdowns, with a passer rating of 111, which is just stupid. I mean, this year from Brady was one of the most efficient years ever, as he also finished the season with an interception percentage of 0.8, which is top 10 of all time. And after week 6, Brady didn't throw another pick all regular season, as this was all enough to lock up the NFL's first ever unanimous MVP award, and at the time at least, it seemed like Brady had destroyed the system QB allegations and continued down his all-time great trajectory, obviously, so this was a great year. His overall volume as a passer does hold him back a little bit from going any higher for me, but this season from Brady still deserves to be remembered positively, even though the only thing anybody really talks about with this Patriots team is what the Sanchez did to them in the playoffs. It's time to talk about the only MVP on this list that isn't a quarterback, which alone should tell you how dominant this man was given that he's at number 8, but give me 2012 Adrian Peterson. This man could have an entire movie made based on just this season. Before the year, most people thought he'd never be the same player again because he was fresh off of an ACL tear, and in the beginning, it looked like most people were gonna be right, because through week 6, AP was averaging 83 yards per game, which seems like a solid amount, but after week 6, we all got to witness something special, and it turns out those stats were weak. His highlights alone should honestly tell you all you need to know. Nobody could stop the man at all. No one. Defenses had no clue what to do, despite the fact that even Peterson himself knew that he was the only source of offense Minnesota had, as from weeks 13 through 15, for 3 straight games, he decided to mess around and casually run for more rushing yards than his quarterback threw for, going for 192 yards per game, as he would go on to finish the 2012 season averaging 131 yards per game on 22 carries. And in week 17, he also clinched a playoff berth for the Vikings with a legacy performance against the Packers, going for 200 yards, falling just 8 yards short of breaking Eric Dickerson's all-time rushing record, despite getting 31 less carries than Dickerson did. So the only thing holding Peterson back for me from going any higher is his lack of touchdowns and versatility in the receiving game, only going for 13 touchdowns on the year, and because he's a rare running back MVP, he's unfortunately always going to be compared to LaDainian Tomlinson's 2006 season when he, went for 33 touchdowns, but also every MVP from here on out is just that legendary. So this placement may seem a little bit low now, but all the guys above him are they're just more impressive. At number 7, give me Patrick Mahomes' 2022 season, which might be his magnum opus if 2023 didn't already take that title from him. And even if we ignore all the wizardry he pulled off in the playoffs, leading the Chiefs to a Super Bowl win with one leg, and his regular season stats alone will be remembered forever as unduplicatable. Not because of his already incredible per game stats of 308 yards per game, 2.5 touchdowns, and a 105 passer rating, but because of how he just carried the offense alone. Remember, this was a Chiefs team that didn't have Tyreek Hill on it for the first time in Mahomes' career and had a rookie running back starting, so more than ever, Mahomes had to carry himself, and he did. In just week 1, he had a perfect game versus the Cardinals, going for nearly 400 yards and 5 touchdowns while sitting out in the 4th quarter, and then had back-to-back 400-yard games versus the 49ers and Titans. And this season, he really just asserted himself as an NFL legend at just the age of 27. At number 6, I have 2019 Lamar Jackson. And this is a campaign that we may never see again. Just missing out on the top 5 for Lamar's best year ever may seem like witchcraft to some of you out there, but just hear me out, okay? This year was everything Cam Newton brought to the table, but better. After not getting an opportunity because of the Flacco, 2019 Lamar burst onto the scene and let the NFL know there wasn't just one superstar young QB primed to take over the league, and that he was special. As the Ravens led the league in rushing yards, had the most rushing yards out of any team since 2010, and Lamar Jackson was pretty much the only reason for that. Every option play the man ran became the most feared move in football. However, once again, just like his 2023 MVP, his passing statistics were extremely low, as he barely averaged 200 yards per game through the air. But when you add on the absurd 80 rushing yards per game, you can start to see why the season was pretty much strictly better than Cam's. He was in a perfect system to flourish in, and he did, leading the Ravens to the number 1 seed in the AFC, beating contenders all year long like the 49ers and Patriots, while being the best player on a 14-win team. And also, just like Adrian Peterson, Lamar's 2019 highlights will forever be iconic, so let's all hope injuries don't continue to get in Lamar's way. At number 5, I have 2016 Matt Ryan. To most of you, probably this is the most shocking placement on the entire list, and honestly, it was for me too. While I was doing the research for this list, I had to sort of create an original blueprint to go off of, and I had Matt Ryan at like 13, behind guys like Cam Newton and Aaron Rodgers in 2021, but as I started to do more research and looked into things further and remembered what that year even was, I started to appreciate what Matt Ryan did this season, as he kept on sliding up the list for me. Ryan's counting stats look absurd, as he absolutely thrived in this Kyle Shanahan Falcon offense, averaging 309 yards per game, 2.5 touchdowns, with a passer rating of 117. Like, bro, come on, you can't just ignore those stats. If Matt Ryan in 2016 was playing last season, he would have walked away with the MVP. So I just don't understand why this regular season gets so disrespected nowadays. And the only reasons I can really come up with are, the playoffs happened, and also Matt Ryan is kind of just a boring player. I mean, his name is Matt Ryan, and he really only had one statement game all year long in 2016, that being when he went for 500 yards and 4 touchdowns versus the reigning NFC Championship Panthers. But besides that, he really did put up his averages almost every game. 270 yards and 2 to 3 touchdowns isn't sexy, but it wins football games. So add that on to Matt Ryan never even making another Pro Bowl again, and you can begin to see why this MVP season gets forgotten. And at number 4, I have 2018 Patrick Mahomes. Man, where do I even start? Like Lamar Jackson one season later, Mahomes was forced to sit behind a Pro Bowler for a season until 2018, when he finally got his chance, and my God did he take it, going for 300 yards and 6 touchdowns in just week 2, and right away, his Hall of Fame legacy started to be written. By year's end, he had the 3rd most passing yards ever by an MVP with 5,000, pairing that with a casual 50 touchdown passes, the highest quarterback rating in the league with 80.3, and the 2nd highest passer rating. And that's how you end up on a list this high. Mahomes made throws this season that we may never see again. He's probably the best player he's ever been right now, but that blend of raw athleticism, gutsy risk-taking, and precision that he had in 2018 was unprecedented, and that led to Mahomes locking up the MVP away from Drew Brees with a 500-yard, 6-touchdown performance in a classic loss versus the Rams, and then turned right around and dropped 300 yards and 4 touchdowns in his sleep. This Chiefs team was also just unfair, for the record. Prime Tyreek Hill, prime Travis Kelce, and they could have been even more dangerous if Kareem Hunt didn't do the thing. Still though, this was Mahomes' greatest regular season to date, but I wouldn't even be that surprised if he managed to top it eventually. So here we are, the top 3, the best of the best in the last 15 years or so, and coming in at number 3, give me 2013 Peyton Manning. And where do I even start with 2013 Manning? This is quite possibly the biggest stat-stuffing season we've ever seen. Simply put, the numbers speak for themselves. most passing yards in a season ever by a quarterback, most passing touchdowns ever, most points scored by a team in a season, most 50-point games in a season since the merger, and I can just go on, but I won't. It was unacceptable. Peyton Manning was just chucking the ball, but he was doing it with laser precision. He only threw 10 interceptions all season to pair that with 55 touchdowns, including a 7-touchdown performance in just week 1. He was 37. He was 37 years old too. It just shouldn't have happened this way. But not only was Peyton Manning a celestial being this year, but his supporting cast was also elite too. Demaryius Thomas, Julius Thomas, Wes Welker, Eric Decker, and a 1,000-yard rusher in Noshan Moreno, and a great defense to rely on. Come on, it's such a shame though that what happened in the Super Bowl happened, because this could have been easily a top 10 team of all time. And the reason Peyton Manning isn't any higher than he is now is mainly just his mobility. Peyton physically was far removed from his prime, and pound for pound, he probably was better in years past as a pure quarterback, but still, you can't ignore setting 2 absurd NFL records that still stand today. At number 2, I have 2020 Aaron Rodgers, and I told you more was coming from him, and here we are. So this was a COVID year, if you can remember, which makes things a little bit questionable, but I'm not gonna lie, that doesn't really matter for me, because this season Aaron Rodgers was the best player in football. No questions asked. After narratives that he had fallen off as a player began to gain some steam, he went out there and played the best football a quarterback can possibly play. At this point in his career, the old man had mastered efficiency, and as of today, he still holds the record for the best touchdown to interception ratio by any MVP ever at 9.6, as he put that alongside 270 yards per game and 3 touchdowns, which turns out, when you give a Hall of Famer great tools such as Davante Adams, who was the best wide receiver in football and an elite offensive line, he's going to take over the league, because it was just stupid what he did in 2020. Teams just didn't have a chance versus him. They couldn't even touch the guy too during most games, so what were they going to do? And Rodgers himself honestly only had 1 bad game all year long versus the Buccaneers in the regular season, and to offset that one mediocre performance, he only had a single game all year where he threw for just 1 touchdown and had 12 games of throwing 3 touchdowns or more, while having the 2nd most efficient season a quarterback ever had, with a passer rating of 121.5. 121.5, and just narrowly lost out on the top spot on this list to Aaron Rodgers. Yeah. After falling just short of beating out Aaron Rodgers, at the number 1 spot, I have none other than 2011 Aaron Rodgers. And let me just say this, we will never see another season like Aaron Rodgers in 2011. There might be a better player in terms of passing yards in a season, maybe they threw for more touchdowns too, but in terms of plain efficiency, this season will never be topped. Highest touchdown percentage in the league by 2%, highest passer rating ever in a season at 122.5, and pair that with the lowest interception percentage with a minimum of 500 attempts as well. At just the age of 28, there was a good reason to believe the NFL was just screwed forever, as Rodgers threw for 309 yards per game, 3 touchdowns, and the aforementioned 122.5 passer rating. You know, just prime Josh Rosen numbers as you do. And to really hammer home how unreplicatably efficient Rodgers was, he had a 3-game stretch where his worst passer rating was a 140.3, a mark that Patrick Mahomes didn't achieve a single time in 2023. And this season was so dominant from Rodgers that Tom Brady's best season ever and Drew Brees' best season ever were both completely overshadowed, as Rodgers and the heavy Super Bowl favorite Packers went 15-1 and claimed the top spot in the NFC. Once again though, he did end up bombing in the playoffs, but still, 2011 Aaron Rodgers was truly special. Anyways, if you liked this video, then subscribe, because I got a lot more videos on the channel just like this one. And if you did like this video, then watch this video that I just did recapping the entire 2023 NFL season. It's pretty good, trust me. Or also, you can check out the Panthers video if you want to learn more about Cam Newton. And thanks to all my Patreons for pledging $1. It truly does mean a lot. But anyways, until next time.